proprietary oxygen-based intestinal cleanser, OxyPowder, backed by FDA-approved phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. All the toxins from the air, the food, the water ultimately ends up in the gut or affects the gut. Take your health into your own hands and start cleansing your body today with OxyPowder. Secure your OxyPowder today at InfoWarsLife.com. That's InfoWarsLife.com.
IRS abuses against political enemies are nothing new. Now, today we're going to have the story of a whistleblowing congressman who decades ago was punished by the IRS. As we're seeing today, we see echoes in Dinesh D'Souza's persecution by the government. We see echoes of it, of course, in the Tea Party persecution that you just saw. This is a congressman that the IRS tried to get out of office by dirty tricks. When that failed, they came after him not only 3 times with criminal prosecutions, which he ultimately beat, but again, they came after him a 4th time and they tortured him as part of that prosecution. Today, we're going to be talking to investigative journalist Mark Adams about the case of Congressman George Hansen, who recently died.
This is an agency that was so abusive, it chilled political speech during the 2012 election. It chilled Tea Party groups from fully engaging the issues.
Because the FBI has not talked to you about the lost emails of Lois Lerner.
They have not.
Has anyone at the Justice Department talked with you or anyone at the Internal Revenue Service about Lois Lerner's lost emails?
I don't know.
Here's the takeaway. Lois Lerner is trying to cover her tracks. And this guy tells us he hasn't even talked to the FBI. What kind of investigation is going on where the FBI won't even talk to the head of the agency that has this kind of stuff going on with their email exchange and won't talk to the agency that lost key evidence in an investigation that's about people's First Amendment rights being targeted? And we get these flippant answers from the commissioner. That's what just bothers. That's what bothers every single American.
The Department of Justice's investigation of this has been woefully negligent.
The biggest part of this is what involvement did the Department of Justice have as well.
Well, thank you for joining us, Mr. Adams.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Knight.
Now, what we're seeing here, it looks like, is we've got the Obama administration obviously using the IRS to target political enemies, to target people they don't like. We see actually some leadership in the GOP that doesn't like the Tea Party either. I think that's a factor in that. We've seen this kind of persecution from the same people from the IRS, along with, and this is an important point we want to cover today, along with the Attorney General, the Department of Justice. We've seen this happen decades ago with Congressman George Hansen. That's why we've got you on to talk about that today.
Well, indeed, you're right. On a previous Alex Jones broadcast, we exposed how the IRS has gotten away with far worse than intimidating free speech. The IRS has an established history of rigging federal elections.
Yes.
This lawless agency has sabotaged selected candidates by planting lies in the media. They did this to Senator Ed Long in 1968 by planting lies in Life magazine. This outrage, by the way, that happened after the senator publicly warned how the IRS too often behaves like a Gestapo that preys on defenseless citizens.
And Congressman Hansen's case is a very good example of this. Let's kind of take this in a timeline, because I think a lot of people have heard bits and pieces about this, how we had a congressman 30 years ago, 35, 40 years ago, who basically took on the IRS, got them angry, they came after him, got him out of Congress, put him in jail, actually even eventually got him tortured. Let's start at the very beginning, how he got the IRS angry with him.
Well, if I had to point to any single event, I would say things really came to a head in 1976 when the Teton Dam burst. Mm-hmm. And after that, the IRS came up with these different schemes so that they could levy taxes on the relief monies that was being supplied to the ranchers and farmers.
Right. So Congressman Hansen took on the IRS on behalf of his constituents, got that removed, the flood tax. But actually, even before that, he had written a book about IRS abuses called To Harass Our People, right?
Yes, all this sort of happened around the same time period. But you're right. He was fighting them on many different fronts.
Yeah, he wrote and got passed the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which still figures prominently today. He also was the first man to propose a flat tax because he was concerned that the complex tax code that the IRS has been given gives them a free hand to do anything to people that they want to. Essentially, if the law is sufficiently complex, some people have said, it's the same as having no law at all. And that's what we have in our IRS code. It is so complex, it's as if there is no law, so they can essentially do whatever they want to people, to political enemies. That's what's going on with the Tea Party. We see them being used to harass and intimidate political organizations. But the case of Congressman Hansen, it was very specific, very unique, and really pretty heinous, wasn't it?
Well, it was. As we said, the first real target was back in '68 with Senator Ed Long. Then it was Senator Joseph Montoya in 1975. They planted lies in the press about him. This time it was not in Life magazine. That was with the participation of Bob Woodward and the Washington Post. Then in the next year, 1976, IRS operatives, they used the same blueprint of destruction on Congressman George Hansen from Idaho.
Dirty tricks, essentially, just before the election, publishing that he has tax problems, right?
That he wasn't paying his taxes. But it backfired on them.
Right.
Congressman Hansen won re-election despite the IRS planted lies in the media that he wasn't paying his taxes.
And let's back up a little bit here, too, because not only did he get them upset exposing abuses, writing a book, enacting a law, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, proposing a flat tax to basically simplify things so they didn't have that free hand. But actually, there was an episode where Lee Roderick, who is a past president of the National Press Club, while he was vacationing in Europe with his wife, said he started talking to an IRS agent that was working over there. And of course, the subject of Congressman Hansen came up. And he said, the IRS agent said, we're going to get him. He said, how? And he said, we have our ways.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Now, this happened, like I said, that happened after the IRS tried to sabotage his 1976 election. After that, the IRS retaliated again by putting Congressman Hansen through the ringer with a criminal audit.
Yes.
Well, the upshot of that was it was determined he was owed a refund.
Yes, exactly.
Now,
yeah, and a criminal audit, that's a...
IRS back off? No, not one bit. It merely intensified their animosity, and as you just pointed out, they were bragging publicly how they were going to get him because we have our ways.
Yes. And as you point out, it was a criminal prosecution. You know, a criminal audit, people are afraid of IRS audits normally, but when they come after you for a criminal audit, that's another item entirely. So he wins and actually gets a refund when they investigate it, but it costs him a lot of money. And he's not somebody like Harry Reid or Nancy Pelosi that becomes multi-millionaires while they're in Congress. This is a guy who didn't have a lot of money, so he gets into a financial situation where he needs to pay some legal expenses, and that's where his troubles start to truly begin. Tell us about that, what he did to try to get money to pay off his legal expenses.
Yes. What happened here is that he approached the Ethics Committee and asked if he could use his congressional office to raise funds to pay off these massive legal debts. They told him, no, you can't do that. So what he did next, with the advice of two attorneys, was to execute a property separation agreement with his wife, Connie, so she could engage in fundraising. All of this massive debt was now legally hers. So while George was busy being a congressman, she was at home trying to raise the capital to pay off what were now her debts. This all took place, by the way, in 1977.
Mm-hmm.
Then, in 1979, 2 years later, the Ethics in Government Act is passed. One of the provisions of the Ethics Act required representatives and senators now had to file disclosure forms with the Ethics Committee. And these disclosure forms had to include not only all of their financial transactions, but their spouse's finances as well. In other words, joint disclosure was now required.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that provision, that violated the property separation agreement that Congressman Hansen was abiding by 2 years before the Ethics Act was even passed.
Mm-hmm.
So he approached the Ethics Committee, and what happened was there's a mutual agreement reached with the Ethics Committee that Congressman Hansen would not include his wife's finances due to his unique legal circumstance that existed prior to the passage of the Ethics in Government Act.
Okay, so he's gone through the extra mile. He goes to the Ethics Committee. He sets up things in a legal structure so that his wife is free to pay off these legal debts. And then he gets this okayed by the House Ethics Committee on 2 occasions, even after they changed the rules. And still, they come after him for that. But before they do, I think it's interesting that Mr. Hunt, the silver trader, who recently died, it was just a couple of days ago, he tried to corner the silver market in 1979, 1980, and he got caught doing that. He was suspended for life with commodities trading, and he was also, I'm sure, got into some legal issues with the IRS. He says that he receives a blackmail letter from somebody saying that they're going to expose that he got favors from Congressman Hansen.
Yeah.
And so they started an investigation on him. That lasts for 2 years, but he's cleared. I think it's kind of interesting. I wonder if Hunt was being used by some kind of a plea bargaining thing where if he would go after Congressman Hansen, they would essentially let him off of maybe some of his IRS problems. I'm sure he had some IRS problems after the major debacle in trying to corner the silver market failed. But I think that's another issue there where they're coming in, they come after time after time after time after Congressman Hansen. He's vindicated, but his legal fees continue to pile on top of each other. They're bankrupting him through the defense of his innocence.
Yes. Your speculation is interesting. I don't think they cut any deal with Nelson Bunker Hunt. However, there was an employee of his, Arthur Emmons, and it appears that he, in fact, was an agent provocateur for the government.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that this would just kind of come out of the blue. They would fight over it for 2 years. Then again, he would be exonerated, just like he was with the dirty tricks before the election, with the criminal audit from the IRS. But then it gets to somebody who's very much in the news today, and that's James Cole, the current Deputy Attorney General at the Department of Justice, the person who's right under former Attorney General Eric Holder, who just left. And James Cole now comes into this picture 20, 35 years ago, I guess. Maybe it's about 35 years ago. He comes into this picture now with a prosecution coming after this separation agreement. Tell us about that.
Okay, here's what happened. Because of the blackmail attempt, that was a pretext then to investigate the congressman. And as you pointed out, James Cole, well, there's James Cole and another attorney, Reed Weingarten. They were working in the so-called public integrity section of the Justice Department. So now they're called in to investigate this blackmail attempt. Well, after investigating Congressman Hansen for almost 2 years, they admit there was no quid pro quo between Congressman Hansen and Nelson Bunker Hunt. Hansen did not perform any tasks or execute any favors on behalf of Nelson Hunt.
Mm-hmm.
But then these headhunters, what they did was to contrive to frame a criminal case against Congressman